Good morning. Welcome everyone to the Atlantic Council Conversation Series at the IMF Spring Meetings in Washington, D.C. Thank you all for joining us remotely today. My name is Rasha Helwa. I'm the Director of Empower Me Initiative at the Atlantic Council, and I'm honored to have with me here today my esteemed guest, Ms. Mafalda Duarte, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, GCF. Welcome, Mafalda.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to have you with us today.
Thank you, Rasha. Pleasure being with you.
Thank you. So our discussion today will mostly focus on the road to COP29, climate risks and climate financing in the MENA region particularly. And I'd like you maybe to take a few minutes first to introduce the Climate Fund, its mission, mandate, for those who are not
Might
really
not
familiar.
know. Sure. So the Green Climate Fund was established roughly 10 years ago as the main financial mechanism of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Roughly a year later, the Paris Agreement was adopted, and the Green Climate Fund became also the key multilateral climate finance mechanism for delivery of the Paris Agreement as far as support to developing countries is concerned. So the mission of the fund really is to empower different partners to deliver climate investments in developing countries. And over the course of this decade, the fund has grown. We have right now $14 billion invested in more than 250 projects in 129 developing countries. And these cover both adaptation and mitigation investments. Actually, the Green Climate Fund is the largest of the multilateral funds delivering adaptation investments. So we invest both on adaptation and mitigation. It's actually pretty much a 50-50% allocation. We are also the largest provider in terms of these funds of grant financing, because we know that in particular for adaptation and to target the most vulnerable countries and communities, grant financing is important. So we are also the largest provider of that type of financing. But we do invest in all sectors. We have a pretty balanced portfolio in terms of different sectors. When it comes to our adaptation investments, we actually have guidance from our board to focus on the least developed countries, the SIDS, as highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and also Africa. And we have been able to honor that guidance as well, coming out of our board. We have the privilege and the responsibility because of this mandate, this important mandate, of having very large scale of resources. We just completed a replenishment last year. So every 4 years we have a replenishment cycle where countries commit funding over a window of a number of years. And we also got our record replenishment, so $13 billion to now allocate over 2024-2027. So we have the privilege and responsibility, as I was saying, to have a very large scale of important resources, very flexible resources. So we can provide funding in grant, in non-grant form, using different types of instruments. And we also have the privilege, but it's also a responsibility, that's why I like to put it this way, of working with the most diversified network of institutions. So, and in that sense, empowering institutions that really have never benefited from climate finance and can now also use climate finance to deliver investments in the areas that where they are operating. This is very important. I just want to stress this. I think this is very important because we know that it's not going to be a handful of organizations that are going to deliver on what's necessary. We actually have to empower a very vast network of organizations, both from public sector and private sector, both from state agencies, non-state agencies, and that's the mandate that we have. This is also the reason why so far already we have around 120 organizations, international and national. But actually, the most of them are national organizations. We have been able to provide funding to national organizations, and I'll speak of an example at some point about Morocco, where we are working with the Agency for Rural Development. So these are the organizations that maybe they are not as large in scope as others, international organizations, but they have pretty important mandates in the countries and the regions where they operate. So it's an extraordinary mandate, and a really major important responsibility.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree, and I think you're doing a great job. How much do you think out of those 13 billion is going to the Middle East and North Africa? And could you please highlight some recent initiatives or projects initiated by the GCF, specifically targeting the MENA region, and what impact do you expect out of those?
In the MENA region, so I was saying we have roughly around 14 billion. In the MENA region, we are allocating roughly 1 billion out of the 14. And it is a priority for us as well, because of our focus on vulnerability. As I was saying, as a matter of fact, we'll probably come back to this at some point. When I took over this job last year and I put forward my vision, 50 by 30, one of the key elements there is the targeting of the most vulnerable. And so the MENA region is highly vulnerable, as we know.
Absolutely.
It's expected to, even if the average global temperature is 2, in the MENA region it will be higher than 2. Has the highest number of countries, concentration of countries that are water stressed. So you have 13 out of 20 of the most water stressed countries in the world are in that region.
High levels of drought, high levels of...
And so for us it's a very important region. Some of the initiatives that we have, I'll just give a couple of examples. So I was talking about Morocco and working with the Agency for Agricultural Development. And in there, for example, we are helping the country with the soil conservation and water harvesting techniques for the agriculture development and rural development. So we are investing, it's just one example of one project, $40 million to replant Aragan tree orchards over a vast land area. So that's one example. In Jordan, another country highly vulnerable, we are also investing in the water sector to make sure that the farmers have access to water without depleting the underground resources, which are under quite significant strain. But we also do beyond the water sector and the agriculture sector. Another example is in Egypt, where we are also making a significant investment to help them reach their renewable energy generation targets. So we are there. We are investing 150 million. This is one of the most recent initiatives to help them generate 14,000 gigawatt hours of renewable energy power. So it's pretty diversified. And of course, always our intent as well as we make these investments to drive resilience outcomes and mitigation outcomes is the socioeconomic impact, so the livelihoods aspect and the job generation aspect, which we also know is quite critical. globally, but in that region.
Yeah, of course.
Um, I was actually I had the, again I had the opportunity to be in. I lived in the region for almost 5 years. I lived in Tunisia for 5 years, and I was there during the Arab Spring. So I'm quite familiar with the region and the
Economic
social economic
composition.
challenges.
Yeah.
So certainly these are very important dimensions.
Absolutely. I think having very limited fiscal space doesn't really allow these countries to act upon climate resilience on their own, and
Yeah.
they'll definitely need the help. When you go into these projects in those countries, what about de-risking? Do you work with other global institutions? Do you go to the World Bank to be a guarantor for your projects, or do you go completely independent?
No. I mean, we are a partner organization. So we always work with partners. As I said, we work either with international organizations like the World Bank or other multilateral development banks, or we work through national organizations. And when I say international organizations, both public and private. So we work both with public sector organizations like UN agencies, MDBs, but we also work with private sector global organizations or investors, let's put it this way. But we also work with national, both public and private organizations. So we have a very vast network at the moment, and it keeps growing. So we have 120 partners we work with. And we have in our pipeline of organizations that have indicated interest to working with us another 155. And several in the countries themselves.
Yeah.
And we have this, it's often said, which is when we have these discussions of climate finance, it's often said that concessional finance is the most vital and scarce
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
resources. And so we are in that position of having been entrusted with managing this pool of resources, which is a very significant one and very scarce, and gives us the flexibility. So we can really look at what the country and the investment that is trying to be pursued requires. So if it requires grants for technical assistance or advisory services or project preparation, we can provide that. If it requires grant resources on the investment side, we can also provide that. But we can also provide loans, more concessional, less concessional. We can support in terms of equity so that the companies themselves can then mobilize debt. We can provide guarantees. We can use other instruments like results-based payments, which we have, for example, for efforts of preventing deforestation. So we have quite a bit of flexibility. And actually what we do with these organizations, you mentioned the World Bank. Of course, we are here in the World Bank IMF spring meetings. And actually what we do with these organizations is we enable them to take on risks or do things that they can't necessarily do by themselves with their own tools and the resources. That's
Yeah.
where we add value and the importance of partnering with these organizations.
And within the context of the multilateral system, all the MDBs are currently it's a prominent topic now on the global agenda. Speaking about the reforms of the MDBs and how they look like in the new generation. And at the same time, multilateral climate funds have intensified their collaboration to improve their complementarity, as you just mentioned, and coherence. So within this setup, what do you expect? How do you see the MDB's role in the coming few years? And
So what I think, and what the developing countries have rightly been asking for is what can be called an architecture or a system or or an ecosystem that is actually fit for purpose for the challenges that we are currently facing and that we will continue to face. And so when we think about that, it's not one type of institutions that are the holy grail. It actually needs to be bringing the best of the different types of partners together, and working together and adding the value that they are best placed to add. So when I think of the climate finance architecture or system, I'm thinking of a number of things. I mean, I'm thinking of the responsibility of governments, both at the national level and international level, to boost resource mobilization, because we know that the quantum of funding that we have at the moment is insufficient to support developing countries.
How much more do we need?
Oh, we need much more. And that's the issue. You're talking about the road to COP29.
Yeah.
This year, we are debating a new collective quantified goal to supersede the $100 billion annually.
Yeah.
And the orders of magnitude of what's needed is several times of that level. So I think that is one is both national and internationally the countries taking responsibility to find the appropriate resource mobilization tools. There are efforts into exploring new taxes, additional fiscal tools. I think it's important. It's also important to hopefully once and for all tackle the distortive subsidies and actually use that fiscal space to do things that align with our development and climate goals. So that's one. The second one is we need the private sector, because we all know that the public resources will not be enough. And so we really need to enter into these partnerships and bring to the table the type of support that is necessary to bring them on. We are I think it's important I think everybody recognizes that we are in particularly challenging times on the back of the pandemic and now the recent wars. What we see is we see a retracting of the levels of investment from private sector in many developing countries. Because of risk considerations, because of investment opportunities elsewhere in other geographies. So it's really necessary to work, to strive to really enhance that ambition. And then we need the MDBs and the funds like ours to work together with the private sector and governments in those endeavors of mobilizing further funding and help them with the reforms of the distortive subsidies, putting new fiscal tools in place. So it's a system, and the system needs to be prepared to both respond to short-term crises. So one of the things that we know is that when it comes to short-term crisis, we need tools that are adequate, that are fast responding, that provide the liquidity that is needed at the moment to tackle the pressing needs. And we need investments that take a more longer-term view. So to me, it's a system. The MDBs are being asked to reform. We are being asked to reform as well, and work more cohesively together. So I think there are important efforts when it comes to the MDBs and the funds as well, as enablers of that much greater impact and flows of investment. One is looking carefully at agility, simplification, and coherence. What are the efforts that can be taken across the MDB system and with the funds so that we have the appropriate modalities of access that are not cumbersome and unnecessarily cumbersome and lengthy. So it's the right balance between speed and quality. So I think that's important. It's a call for all of us to do that. I'm taking that responsibility within the Green Climate Fund. And also, in the case of the MDBs, of course, seeing how can they further stretch their balance sheet to provide more quantum. Because we have an issue of quantum and quality. And quality, when we talk about quality of finance, we are talking about, the appropriate modalities for access, but we are also talking about quality in terms of coming together with others for greater impact, for example. So there's a huge call for organizations to come together and work a lot more closely in alignment and the ownership and leadership of the countries, of course, but to work much more as a system
As
that
one
adds
front.
value than one, let me do it by myself
Yeah,
or
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Um, Now that we covered financing, let me ask you about your approach for technical assistance also within the region. Like, for instance, GCC countries, they're going through their own climate risks. They might have the resources, but not probably the technical capability to deal with that and to build climate resilience. How do you approach technical assistance in the region, particularly with the GCC countries?
So we have at our disposal one tool. This is why I was saying that we have this privilege and responsibility. We have one tool which is called the Readiness Program, where actually we provide grant resources to countries to help them build their institutional capability, help them deepen their understanding of certain topics. Help them enhance their national adaptation plans, their national determined contributions, their policies, their strategies, come up with an articulation of what one might call the country program or an investment plan of which projects are priority for each country or region. And we provide these resources and we work with 100 partners in delivery of these resources. So again, for the MENA region, we have provided 50 million since inception of this readiness program to help them with these efforts of institutional building and enhancement of their know-how and the policy frameworks. So this is again the privilege of our position in delivering that support. And by the way, just to say that since these programs were established, we have already provided more than $600 million of this type of support through grant resources. And we are delivering this support through 100 partners, roughly 100 partners.
From both the private and public sector.
And yes, and even in terms of the public sector, it ranges from again UN agencies or non-state actors to academic institutions. So it's a really wide range of partners. What we want to do now, because we had last year our board approved the next allocation for this program. So board approved $500 million last year in October, and we are starting the new cycle 2024-2027. We want to make sure that we work very closely with the countries and help them in a sort of like matchmaking, that we really understand what are the more strategic priorities, and we help them select the more strategic partners to be able to deliver and help them with their priorities. Because it's difficult to navigate, as we know, for any given institution or country to know who are all of the organizations out there that might specialize on specific topics. So this is our new 4-year cycle, and we very much look forward to working with the region on that.
That's wonderful, Mafalda. And on the renewable energy side, transitioning towards renewables is crucial for climate action, obviously.
Yes.
So what role is the GCF playing in facilitating the adoption of renewable energy technology in MENA? Like you mentioned, a project in Morocco. Could you give me other examples?
One in Egypt. We work quite a lot on the energy sector space, both in terms of renewable energy generation and energy access. Because let's not forget, and speaking more broadly of the Africa region, not just MENA. And I think it's important for everybody to realize that we have still, this is 2024. We need to reckon with these dates. It's 2024, and we have almost 700 million people without access to energy, and 600 million of those in Africa. So it's both important, the transition to renewable energy sources, but also with a focus on energy access through renewable energy sources. We know that the region is vastly endowed with both solar and wind.
Absolutely.
And also it's because of that also and the possibility of having um, economies of scales and costs when it comes to renewable energy generation that are very competitive. The region is also well placed. Some of the countries are well placed to also be part of this new green hydrogen
Yeah.
market. So again, just to say that it is one area that we have invested significantly. We are investing in the region in renewable energy generation. It's really important for this region as well because either we recognize it or not, the MENA region are amongst the most carbon intensive, per capita carbon intensive countries in the world, also because they are quite endowed with resources.
Yeah.
So it's quite important to invest there.
And looking ahead to COP29, which I'm sure you're looking forward to, what are the key priorities and expectations for climate action in the MENA region, and how can stakeholders collaborate effectively to achieve tangible outcomes in line within the goal of the Paris Agreement?
So, I mean, more broadly in terms of COP29, this year, I mean, my own view is, and gladly many share the same view. This will be a COP where a lot of attention will be placed on finance.
Yeah.
What's called means of implementation, helping countries really deliver, particularly delivering finance to developing countries. We have this objective of let's see how far we are in terms of the new collective quantified goal for climate finance, and how we bridge differences of views in terms of what is to be this new collective quantified goal. But I think it's equally really important to focus on delivering on promises made before.
Yeah.
We keep making promises in all COPs, different types of promises to different regions in different sectors. I think it's important to focus the attention quite a lot more, not in keep adding. I mean, it's important to add new commitments if they haven't been made necessarily. But it's really important to focus on what have we actually achieved. I mean, we know that the global stocktake last year indicated that we are far from where we need to be. So conversations around delivery of past commitments and what is it that we need to do collectively to drive ambition. When it comes to the MENA region, I think it's really important to keep, and the countries in the region with the relevant partners, to keep emphasizing the vulnerability, the vulnerability of the countries and the support that is needed because of that vulnerability. Because it might get lost sometimes in the other broader categories of vulnerability.
Yeah. And the focus goes to the LDCs, and sometimes we forget about the middle-income countries.
So it's important to keep talking about what is vulnerability and what are the different dimensions of vulnerability, and how does one have to think about support to the vulnerable countries and regions and communities. This is also why, as I said, when I announced my vision of 50 by 30 for the Green Climate Fund last year, I specifically said it's important to honor what we have been asked to do, but it's important to take it one step further and not just think about those broad guidance parameters of where we have to invest, but how does one actually target the most vulnerable? What are the deliberative efforts that we need to actually target the most vulnerable?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mafalda. This has been fascinating. I'm sure the audience learned a lot about the GCF and also climate risks and financing in the MENA region. We look forward to our next conversation with you. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure being with you.
Thank you.